Have you a preference to racing cocks or hens, David?
I've raced cocks right through to the end. I've won probably nearly as many races with cocks as I have with hens. I find the hens are better as the distance gets longer and late in the season the cocks want to mate up. But I've never rejected a cock in terms of racing capacity, and I think we should give all of the birds an opportunity to prove themselves.
At what time would you pair your stock birds up, David?
I've tended to go for last week in August, early September, but whilst it's a good thing to have the birds, the breeding finished by soon after Christmas, Warren and others know that I'm often putting late breds in the loft that were hatched at the beginning of March, and they've been extremely successful. So I mate up when I'm ready. I like to start early, but I'm never disciplined enough to stop at Christmas.
What do you look for when the birds loose form?
I think one of the important indicators is the consistency and the colour of the droppings, and I'm constantly in the loft evaluating the health of the birds by the droppings, and then I'm observing the birds themselves. Quite often, if they're not flying as well, sometimes that difference can be quite subtle between them flying for, if their average is 3/4 of an hour, then one day they might only do 35 minutes, and I question why has that happened, what's changed, did they have an extra toss, is there a bird that's not as well and that's influenced the others. So all of those things I'm looking for all the time.
How would you describe a fit pigeon?
I like a bird that's very bright in the feathers, usually very active in the loft. In terms of alertness, doesn't have to be rushing around. Some of the best birds are very relaxed, but there's a brightness and a sharpness about them. Very keen to exercise, and content in their space in the loft. They're not fighting with everything. Some people would probably think that was a good sign of energy and vigour, but I like the whole team to get on with each other as well as to be eager to fly. So again, it comes back to that health factor, and I think if you're a good observer of your birds and you know what's going on in the loft, you'll see that some are coming up and a bit brighter than others, and they're the ones to watch.
Is there anything you would do differently in the longer races, like feeding or training birds?
This probably sounds rather strange given the results that Bun and I had last year, but I set out to win 2 races last year, Alice Springs and the Size Produce race. They were probably my 2 worst races for the year. So all of my theories about getting them just right for some reason didn't work, but perhaps contributed to the overall health of the loft, which meant that in all the other races they performed well. One of the things I do like flying longer distance races, and I think Alice Springs is the ultimate race for South Australian pigeon flyers. I train quite often on their own. I'm not afraid to go 300, maybe 350 kilometres and let out 10 birds. The last couple of years I went to a particular spot, it was about 200 k's away, and they had 2 years ago they had three days in a row from the same place. I'll also toss in the dark close to home, and the last couple of years the other thing I found was that quite often the birds would wait to be fed, so I'd leave the doors open and they'd come out and walk around in the dark and chase each other and fly up on the roof. They would seem very content in the dark, so I decided the place where I was living there weren't any overhead wires, so I took them out well after dark, sometimes from a k or 2 away, sometimes 3 k's, and tossed them. And by the time they'd done that 3 or 4 times, they were all getting home within about 10 minutes. So I knew they knew where they were, and that made me optimistic.
What type of work and feeding do you give your birds prior to the start of the racing season?
When I'm ready to train them, I've often talked about educating them, giving them the short tosses close to home, get used to the basket. But then once they were on the road and being tossed 100 k's, 150 k's and going into the races, I always tried to make sure that birds had at least a dozen tosses between about 15 k's and say half race distance. So that was a minimum. Sometimes they had up to 15 tosses, and I always felt confident that they were fit as well as knowing where they were heading. In terms of the feed, I've experimented over the years. I got hold of a copy of Wendell Levi's book, The Pigeon, about 30 years ago, and that had an analysis of all the protein and carbohydrate, and I worked out what I thought was an appropriate mixture based on all the information in the book. Very interested to see that when I got hold of some of the feeding plans that Natural and people like that are developed in Europe, my feed mix was very close to the ones that they were recommending. About 3 or 4 years ago I fed according to the European system, used depurative through the week and built up later in the week ready for the race. I would have to say I cannot see any difference in my results between feeding like that and feeding perhaps a more traditional Australian mix, but my protein levels are probably lower than other people's. I'd probably only be feeding around 25% peas, and use quite a lot of maize and small seeds as well. So I've adjusted mixes during the year. Some years I've fed them exactly the same from beginning to end. I don't think it makes, my experience for my birds is it hasn't made a lot of difference. But the critical thing is to stick to the system that you've developed, and they seem to perform.
Do you medicate through the race season, and if so, what do you use?
I found the preferred medication for me, or for the birds, have been Turbosol, and I've used Respite. I tend to take the weaker solution of drug for respiratory conditions, and because of the loft location being a coastal location with high humidity, quite often that's been suggested by the vets that a 3-week cycle is a good cycle to do that, and so that's what I've tended to stick to, again without the microscopic analysis to know exactly what's happening, but that sort of system's worked for me. Last year we had a bout of wet weather for a number of days, and the humidity was extremely high, and I went back to a fortnight rotation for a couple of weeks, and that seemed to be helpful for the birds.
Yeah. Dave, you've been in pigeons quite some time. What fly would have impressed you most over that time?
I've tended to take a very narrow view of that in response to that question, and actually compared people that I've raced competitively against within my area, which limits the sort of people I'd look at. But I'd have to say that Lee Abbott is a person that you can't take for granted at any point. I think he's had exceptionally good pigeons. I think people like John Pryor and others like him have done a great service to the sport by developing particular sorts of pigeons, Alan Goodger before him. But this is a very biased perspective, but they also lived in a position that enabled them to capitalise on their own capacity to develop birds. I think John Hoffman's done a great deal for the sport by being involved in bringing pigeons into the country, and we are richer for that sort of experience. But people like Lee, Bronte Andrew Arthur is someone who certainly knows what he's doing, and has proved that he can be extremely competitive flying in a very difficult position. So I tend to take a more localised view, and For those who live in other places, if that seems like a narrow view, then so be it.